Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm Nerd Nook for our fourth little permaculture chalk talk. And today we're going to talk about the nitrogen cycle. Now, of all of the biogeochemical cycles that we've mentioned, this has the most moving parts. This is the most complicated. I'm going to try and give a 15 to 20 minute gardener's synopsis of the cycle, and that's kind of a fool's errand to a certain extent because there is so much involved. There's a lot of biology, there's a lot of complex chemistry, there's a lot of organisms involved. And in order to collapse this down into a useful little mini packet, my plan is to talk about the generalities of the chemistry, the generalities of what different organisms do, without giving a complete list of everything that does the thing. At some point, I want to do a deep dive into all of the plants and different organisms that do nitrogen fixing. That's an important list to have, but that will be its own separate video. So for this one, I'm just going to talk about the broad categories of things to get an overview of how the nitrogen cycle works. Now, nitrogen, you are currently swimming in a bath of nitrogen, right? Air is mostly nitrogen, N2 gas. But plants are not able to use N2 gas, okay? We have tons of it, and it's useless, right? Okay? We have lots of it, but it is not useful, okay? So, we need to get that into a form that plants can use. Okay? This is the process of nitrogen fixation. Okay? Now, nitrogen fixation is a process, again, I'm going to talk about what goes in, what comes out, and not the complexity in the middle. What goes in is nitrogen gas, and I'm just going to say biology, okay? Nitrogen gas and biology. And then what comes out is ammonia. And then ammonia plus more biology can be converted into what we really want to see, which are the nitrate and nitrite ions. NO2 minus and NO3 minus. NO3 minus is nitrate, NO2 is nitrite. Okay? The ITE suffix always has one less oxygen than the ATE suffix. That's your clue to remembering these. Okay, so nitrate NO3, nitrite NO2. This is, at the end of this chain, is what plants really want to be working with. Okay? Now, so that's the first definition. Nitrogen fixation is the conversion of nitrogen gas by biological systems into other forms that plants are capable of using. Okay? The second definition is denitrification. Okay? Denitrification is literally just the opposite of this, where we have nitrate, nitrite, or ammonium, and a biological process converts it back to nitrogen gas. Okay? Again, in a biological process. All of the enzymes which are doing nitrogen fixation, or you also hear nitrification in here sometimes as well, and denitrification, all of the organisms that possess the enzymes to actually do this are bacteria. Okay? But many of those bacteria require a symbiotic relationship with a plant. Okay? Not 100%, but many. So this is where we get into very complex systems. So let's look at that. And there isn't quite enough room on that board, so I shall grab a new board. And let's look at how this works in an actual system. So, as with past ones, we'll draw a landform. Draw a nice lake, and I'll just draw a little topography. The topography is not super important here. We still will have a net runoff from the mountains toward the ocean. Okay, we still will have that net runoff. I wanted to draw a pond in here. My blue marker is weak, but it should be good enough just to draw a little water level. Okay. We do need to talk about fresh water here a little bit, so I want to make sure we have a pond. There still is a net flow off the continent, but we're not going to see large quantities of nitrogen sequestration in the deep oceans the way we see with some of the other nutrients because of denitrification. We'll talk about that in a bit. So up here in the air we have all of our little nitrogen gas molecules floating around, being happy little nitrogen gas molecules. Okay. So we have this entire sea of nitrogen, but we don't have any of it in a form that plants can actually use. So where does nitrogen fixation occur? Well, the oldest, probably evolutionarily the oldest, definitely evolutionarily the oldest group that do nitrogen fixation do it here. Okay? And here, in our water, cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. Okay? It is very common to find nitrogen fixation in cyanobacteria. Okay? Well, where else do you find cyanobacteria? Okay? Another place we find cyanobacteria if I throw a little tree in here, what do many trees have growing on them? Lichens. Okay? What is a lichen? Okay. A lichen is a symbiosis between cyanobacteria and fungi. So you will see nitrogen fixation occur in many lichen species. And then some rain falls, the rain washes down the trunk, dissolves some of the nitrate which has been produced and washes it down onto the tree roots. So the lichens growing on the sides of your trees, those are not pests, those are part of the ecology of your forest. And they are playing a direct role. They look like just kind of little things in the background, but they're not. They're playing a direct role here in the fertilization of this tree. Okay? So there's our cyanobacteria. Now, the next place we need to talk about nitrogen fixation is down here on the roots of this tree. Those are ugly roots, but we're just going to call them roots. Okay? Okay? Bacteria in the root zone fix nitrogen. Now, when we're talking about these bacteria in the root zone, we are talking about bacteria that are pretty dependent on symbiosis with specific groups of plants. The oldest known, not oldest evolutionary, but the oldest known in the literature and discussed by farmers, version of this are legumes and rhizobium bacteria. And there's 3 big genera of rhizobium bacteria, and many species within those genera, and each species of rhizobium will associate with a specific or a small subset of legumes. Okay, and this happens worldwide. Legumes are everything from big tall forest trees like the very famous black locust to little alfalfas and clovers and little low growing herbs, right? And you have leguminous trees and herbs literally worldwide. Okay? So they form an association where the bacteria lives in or on the root. Usually in most cases, the plant will produce a nodule that gives the bacteria a home. And then the bacteria will cease to be a free-living organism and will become dependent on the tree or the herb to supply it with carbon. Remember the previous talk, we talked about carbon fixation in the carbon cycle. So the tree is going to fix carbon, take CO2 and convert it to sugar, feed that down to the bacteria. The bacteria is going to take nitrogen gas, convert it to nitrite, and feed that to the plant root. Okay? So you have this interaction. And while legumes and rhizobium are the most commonly discussed, there are many other forms of this. There are other bacteria completely unrelated to rhizobium that form nitrogen-fixing associations and do it with other groups of plants. Okay? So this is not just a legume story. And this is where telling that full story will be its own separate talk, and we'll look worldwide at lists of plants by taxonomy that engage in nitrogen-fixing interactions. I will say here that we've only scratched the surface about what we know about this interaction. Okay, we are constantly finding, oh, guess what? That one's a nitrogen fixer. We never knew it, right? It's fairly common. It pops up in the literature fairly regularly where we find new types of nitrogen fixers. Okay, so what we think we know now is not the full story. That is for sure. And there's also a number of plants that are in taxonomic groups with no nitrogen fixers, and they're kind of question marks. Do they fix nitrogen or do they not? There are some arguments in the literature over some. So that will get its own talk at a future date. Now, one more group of plants I do want to talk about that fix nitrogen, again associating with bacteria, are aquatic ferns. Called azolla ferns. Okay, azolla ferns. These are little plants. They sit and they just float right in the surface tension. Okay, and they do fix nitrogen. These are even if you know about legumes, you probably also know that legumes are very commonly very important agricultural plants. But these little azolla ferns are used in aquatic agricultural systems in various places in the world. Fairly well known with them. Well-known example of this is the Hawaiian lotus system. Again, we'll do a talk on that at some point here. But these little azolla ferns can fix nitrogen and feed that into aquatic systems. Now, nitrogen is a very common limiting reagent. We talked about limiting reagent in an earlier video. I'll put up a link here at this point in this one if you want to pause it and go review if this is the first place where you found this playlist. But nitrogen is a very common limiting reagent in terrestrial ecosystems, but it's uncommon for it to be a limiting reagent in aquatic ecosystems because of the blue-green algae and then also because of the exoliferin. Okay, so it's more of a lack of nitrogen is more of a problem in terrestrial ecosystems than aquatic ecosystems. So we have the start of our cycle. We have nitrogen being fixed into forms that plants can use. This is nitrogen fixation or nitrification. But then you also have denitrification. You'll learn very quickly here. I cannot spell to save my life. There we go. Denitrification this is a bacterial function, and it usually happens in the lower soil levels, especially in aquatic systems. Okay? So your denitrifying bacteria are usually going to be not, I'm not going to say they're all anaerobes, at least not all obligate anaerobes, but this tends to be something which is occurring, fairly low down in the soil horizon, or low in a stream bed, in the lower levels of gravel where you're starting to have less oxygen. Okay? So that's usually where this occurs, and then that, of course, is taking the nitrates and nitrites and putting them back into elemental nitrogen. Okay? This is important in septic treatment systems, that you'll have a series of aerobic digesters and then anaerobic digesters to get everything converted into one form and then create an environment which is really good for bacteria that put it back into N2 gas and denitrify the waste. Okay? So switching back and forth between aerobic and anaerobic systems to take advantage of these natural processes. Okay? And then the last little piece of this is we need our little stick figure sheep here. Going downhill, he's got some little plant that he's eating, and we will have some conversion of this plant matter to ammonia, which can then be converted back to nitrate by our bacteria. Okay? So soil bacteria can take ammonium, and this would come from urine primarily, some breakdown material, some breakdown products of fecal material as well, and take the ammonium and convert that back into NO3 and allow it to recycle. So again, as with some of the previous cycles we talked about, animal life is an important distributor of nutrients across the landscape. He can eat a plant here and then go release the ammonium over here and spread this back and forth, irrespective of the overall water leaching gradient. Okay? So our little critter is also an important factor in interacting with the greater nitrogen cycle and spreading nutrients across the landscape. Okay, so there is our basic overview of the nitrogen cycle. The kind of the key players, again, by category. We have floating fern as a category, we have seed plant as a category, we have lichen as a category, we have blue-green algae as a category. And in a future video, we will dive into these categories specifically and look at all of the players. Because understanding the nitrogen cycle and putting the right players in the right places is a very important part of permaculture design and building sustainable fertility into your landscape. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. I hope you will tune in for the next one when we do go into those categories. Till then, have a great day.